Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk about some of the discussions that were being had in the comments section when it comes to the Idaho 4 case. Now, I always feel like there's a lot of really good information in the comments, and a lot of times it never gets out there. So I'm going to start doing this more often, where I talk a little bit more about the discussions that are being had in the comments, as well as the questions that are being asked. But today I want to talk about why was Bryan Kohberger not questioned after Washington State University police located his vehicle and identified him on November the 29th. Now, a lot of people have said that the reason that they believe that law enforcement didn't bring Bryan Kohberger in for questioning is because they didn't want to tip him off. And I can understand that. I mean, it would make sense that law enforcement would not want to scare off a potential person of interest in the very beginning of an investigation. But how long do you let that go on? 1 week, 2 weeks? In this case, it was 7 weeks. So that just allows this suspect more time to hide evidence or destroy evidence. It allows them a lot more time to create problems for the investigation. Think about this. If you or I, let's say, robbed a bank and they had footage of us on security cameras and they were able to follow that security camera footage and find us, do you think that they're just going to sit around and watch us? Or do you think they're going to bring us in for questioning? Of course, they're going to bring us in for questioning. So why wouldn't they bring in Bryan Kohberger after they located his car and discovered that he matched the description that Dylan Mortensen gave investigators? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It seems as though after Washington State University police located his vehicle, ran his tags, got all of his information, looked at his driver's license, so now they know what he looks like. They know that he's a student at Washington State University. It seems like at that point, they would have maybe done a little more investigation and then brought him in to question him. Someone who can take the lives of 4 young adults with a knife is a very dangerous individual. Someone that you want to get off of the streets as soon as possible. You don't really want to leave them out there roaming around. They might think that they've gotten away with the crime and decide to do it again. So it just wouldn't make sense to drag your feet on information when it comes to someone who you believe might have committed a quadruple homicide. An in-person interview can tell investigators a lot. They can look at the reactions of the person that they're talking to. They can see how they respond and how they answer questions. They can ask them if they have an alibi. Where were they at the time of the crimes? They may not be able to come up with an alibi, or they may have a rock-solid alibi that proves that they couldn't have been part of these crimes. It could go either way. But in my opinion, you don't know any of these things unless you ask the questions. Now, as far as tipping off the suspect, giving them the opportunity to flee, I would have to ask, where would Bryan Kohberger go? Where would he flee to? It's not easy to run from the feds. It's not just something where you pick up your life and you disappear. It's not that simple. You need money. We hear about millionaires and billionaires running from the feds and disappearing. But you have to have money to do that. Bryan Kohberger didn't have money. So where was Bryan Kohberger going to run to? You need gas. You need food. You need a place to stay. Not to mention, once your identity is out there, you're done. It's not easy to run from the feds. We just saw this in the Luigi Mangione case. He was on the run, and they caught him within a week. And he had money. And he also had aliases. So they caught him pretty quick. People do go on the run from the law, but they usually get caught very soon after because it's not something that's easy to do. It's not easy to run from the feds. We know that Bryan Kohberger's dad probably wasn't going to help him. I mean, he called the cops on him and had him arrested for stealing his sister's cell phone when he was a teenager. So he probably wasn't going to get too much help from his family. So that would be the one question I would have to ask about that is, where would Bryan Kohberger even run to? It seems as though law enforcement would want to get someone who they suspect may have committed a quadruple homicide off of the streets as soon as possible, before this person has an opportunity to commit more crimes. At least if you bring him in and question him and then he flees, then that's a pretty good indication that he had something to do with these crimes. I could understand if investigators thought that Bryan Kohberger might lead them to something. You know, if this was a crime involving substances or money. But it wasn't. What would Bryan Kohberger lead them to? Maybe the weapon. But to me, it just doesn't make sense to leave someone who you believe is this dangerous out on the streets after you've already discovered them. I mean, they questioned everyone else, right? They questioned Jack S. and they questioned Jack D. and they questioned Dylan and Bethany and all of the people who were around these victims right before they lost their lives. They questioned all of those people. They weren't worried about scaring those people away. And those people actually did leave the area after they were questioned. Bryan Kohberger didn't even leave the area. He stayed in Pullman, Washington for another month. So it doesn't seem as though he was trying to evade police or, hide out or lay low. I mean, he stayed in school and finished out the semester. They may have not had enough evidence to arrest him, but they could definitely pull him off the streets and question him. He may give something up right there. Something else that I wonder about is how much information that they got from Bryan Kohberger when he interviewed for the Pullman Police Department in April. They must have had a pretty decent amount of information. They had his entire background. So it makes me wonder how much information that they already had on Bryan Kohberger. This is just my opinion, but I believe that Bryan Kohberger was in the equation a lot sooner than we know about. I don't believe that they just stumbled upon Bryan Kohberger. In my opinion, he fits in this investigation early on. I have a very hard time believing that they plucked his white Hyundai Elantra out of a sea of 22,000 white Hyundai Elantras. I have a hard time believing that they identified him from a description that he was over 5'10" with an athletic build and bushy eyebrows. That's a lot of young males out there. I have a hard time believing that they just literally plucked Bryan Kohberger right out of the population. I think that has a lot to do with why they didn't question him. I think that has a lot to do with a lot of the things that don't make sense in this case. A lot of the things that don't make sense in this investigation. It just seems odd to me that someone who has spent the majority of their life educating themselves in order to work for law enforcement and then interviews with the Pullman Police Department just a few months before the Idaho 4 crimes occurs, becomes the sole suspect in a highly publicized quadruple homicide. I mean, think about that for a second. Bryan Kohberger doesn't have a history of violence. He doesn't have a history as a criminal. I mean, he stole his sister's cell phone back when he was a teenager, but that hardly amounts to someone who could commit a quadruple homicide. It just seems odd how Bryan Kohberger fits into this investigation. Something else that we talked about was Bryan Kohberger getting pulled over by Latah County Sheriff's Department on August the 21st for a seatbelt violation. Now, a lot of you made a very good point, and that is that in Idaho, a seatbelt violation is secondary. So Bryan Kohberger must have been pulled over for something else. Is it just me, or does Bryan Kohberger get pulled over a lot? 4 times in 4 months by 4 different agencies. Now, for this particular traffic stop on August the 21st, all he got was a $10 fine for the seatbelt violation. So that deputy must have let him off on the initial reason that he pulled him over. Something really strange about the August 21st traffic stop is that they don't want to release the body cam footage. So they're stating that it could affect Bryan Kohberger in the Idaho 4 trial. What would a traffic stop in August have to do with a crime in November? Now, we do know that he was pulled over approximately 2 miles from the 1122 King Roadhouse. But he was also in an area where there's a lot of stores. So it's very possible that Bryan Kohberger was just going to the store. We've heard from locals that a lot of Pullman, Washington residents go shopping in Moscow, Idaho. So it's very possible that Bryan Kohberger was either coming or going from the store. It's also very possible that Bryan Kohberger said something to this deputy that pulled him over. And maybe that's why they don't want to release that body cam footage. We do know that during this interaction with this deputy, that Bryan Kohberger gave him his telephone number. So are they not releasing the body cam footage because of something that he may have said? Or maybe because of something that might be in his car? At first I thought that maybe it was possible that he had a passenger. But the PCA states that Bryan Kohberger was the sole occupant in the vehicle when he was pulled over. So it's not a passenger. Is it possible that maybe Bryan Kohberger had a firearm in his car? It's not illegal to carry a firearm in your car in Idaho without a carry permit as long as it's visible. So maybe Bryan Kohberger was explaining to this officer why he had this firearm. Or maybe he was even just making him aware that he had a firearm in his car. Or maybe you could just see it in the body cam footage, since it would need to be visible. Now we know that the Idaho 4 crimes were carried out using a knife. But I've said since the very beginning that it would be extremely difficult to contain 6 people in a house with a knife unless you either knew them or you had a firearm to keep everyone contained. So is it possible that maybe Bryan Kohberger had a firearm in his car, and that's why they don't want to release that footage? Because we don't know that a firearm wasn't used in this crime. We haven't been told about a firearm, but we don't know that a firearm, wasn't used to contain the housemates. Here's something else. We know that Bryan Kohberger interviewed with Pullman Police Department in April. So we've heard that he didn't get that position. But what if maybe they needed him for another position? I mean, judging by Bryan Kohberger's education, it seems as though he was headed towards working for law enforcement at some point. So maybe that was what he was talking to this deputy about. And that's why he gave the deputy his phone number. It just seems odd that they're not releasing this body cam footage from the August 21st traffic violation. But, going back, like I said, Bryan Kohberger gets pulled over a lot. And he also gets out of a lot of tickets. He seems to get a lot of warnings. I mean, he got the $10 citation for the seatbelt violation, but they must have let him off of the primary violation, what they pulled him over for. And then, of course, when he was pulled over on October 13th in Washington, she let him off with a warning. And then he was also let off with warnings when he was pulled over in Indiana, when he was driving across country with his dad. Now, that's another thing, is they released the body cam footage from the October 14th traffic stop, but not the August 21st. He obviously appears to be very respectful to law enforcement to be getting all of these warnings. They're not issuing citations, they're just giving him warnings. So, is it possible that in this August 21st traffic stop that investigators established some sort of connection between Bryan Kohberger and one or more of the victims? Maybe that's a reason why they're not releasing that body cam footage, because that's something that we don't have right now, or something I haven't seen as of yet. I have yet to see a connection between Bryan Kohberger and these victims, or anyone who knew these victims. So maybe that's a possibility, that during this traffic stop is when investigators realized that he had a connection to maybe one or more of these victims, maybe even just the King Road house. Tell me what you think. Do you think that it's strange that Bryan Kohberger wasn't questioned after they discovered him on November the 29th? He was right there in Pullman, Washington. And do you think that maybe it's possible that they're not releasing the body cam footage because of something that may have been in his car, or something that he may have said to the deputy? Let me know what you think in the comments. And thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Now, Sunday at 7:30 Eastern Time, I will be on a live with A.R. Hayes and Pete Altieri from Murder Metal Mayhem. So I'm really excited about that. Pete's been away for a little while, so we're excited to bring him back and get him back into the swing of things. It's always a pleasure working with A.R. Hayes and Pete Altieri. So keep an eye out for that on Sunday night at 7:30 Eastern Time. I hope that y'all had an amazing day. We'll see you next time.